don't we just start by how did you get involved with people from Pskov or from Russia?
When the wall came down, the U.S. and Russian governments connected colleges and universities on the two sides to engage in academic exchange as the initial part of the work. It then extended beyond that. So the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, a couple of key people on the campus who were interested in this kind of work wrote a proposal and got an IREX proposal funded to do, I think it was 8 courses, 6 or 8 undergraduate courses in Pskov. And
How did they get connected to Pskov? You know?
I don't know, but I can put you in touch with the guy, as a secondary source.
Okay.
And the project was funded, and it was either 6 or 8 courses, and I was asked if I'd be willing to teach a course in the American political system.
Huh.
And I was a state legislator. I had never taught a college course before, but they said, "Don't worry, we'll help you." And they were of some help. But once I started thinking about it, I realized I could do this. I could organize the curriculum, etc. And so I and another person from West Springfield were paired up because they always sent in pairs at that point 2 people to teach 2 different courses. And so she and I went to Russia. And
what year?
I can't even, I knew you were going to ask that, and I was about to say I can't even tell you exactly what year it was.
Yeah.
But we can figure that out.
Yeah. And you had never been there before?
Never been to Russia, but I had done a fair amount of traveling as a legislator as part of various delegations. And I enjoyed traveling, and I enjoyed being in different cultures, and I enjoyed exchange of views and learning other political and economic systems, something about them, and sharing with them what I could as a quote civilian. I may have been an elected official, but I was a state elected official, not a federal elected official. Right. So I considered myself, as you described it, a citizen diplomat, not anything beyond that. Mm-hmm. So we spent 3 weeks there, and I taught 5 days a week. And
in English?
In English, there was a translator. There were a couple of translators that I worked with, one of which was Sergei Kovalenko, who I assume you interviewed on your UMass technology exchange, because he and his wife came here after a while, and they both are successful in the American economy now. He is in tech, and she is a professor at, I think, Suffolk University, and a very well-respected business professor. Mm. So, and if you haven't talked to him, you may want to talk to him, because he was part of this experience. And I befriended him because he met me at the airport, and then he did some of the translation. There was a professional adult translator, but he was a sometimes student translator for me in different settings, mm-hmm. including classroom. But it was mainly in other settings. In any event, after the successful program of 6 or 8 courses, UMass was either approached USAID, and they wrote a 3-year project grant, received about $2.5 million. And this was for a 3-part project. One was to develop an academic program at Pskov Polytechnic Institute and that was in regional planning and business development, something like that. And then they also had a business exchange, and somebody from the School of Management was in charge of that. And then they had a political exchange, and I was asked to coordinate the political exchanges. And so I worked on that grant for 3 years, and we did at least 4 or 5, maybe even 6 exchanges. There may have been one each way each year, but I'm not remembering exactly. But we did exchanges and brought people here as well as us going there.
And that was when that was part of when I hosted people at my house. That was one of those kind of exchanges.
That
Or
was
that
later. That
later?
was later.
Okay.
And I'll
Okay.
explain how we got to that.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. Okay.
had
So was this Russia or was it the Soviet Union? Do you remember?
Russia, absolutely Russia. The wall was gone. Relations were being developed.
Yeah.
And this was a tool that the governments were using to connect Russians and Americans, and to do so in areas that would be of mutual concern and interest. At the beginning, of course, they were mainly learning about us, but we made it a point in the approach that we took to always be asking questions about them and their systems and what their aspirations were, etc., so that it was mutually beneficial. We always framed it as engaging in mutually beneficial exchange. And then when this grant was completed, they had an academic department that they had started. I can report that years later, it was one of the most successful and enrolled in departments. And it wasn't a technology since Pskov Polytechnic, it was technical. There was some technical, but this was not principally technical. But there was
regional planning.
Regional planning and business development.
Okay.
And they did use GIS and some of those kinds of technologies. So it wasn't technology ignorant. It did involve technology, but it wasn't like a computer science or engineering program.
Right.
We did establish some connections between Massachusetts and Pskov people in the business sphere. And of course, we went really deep on politics. And so what happened was, at the end of that almost 3-year grant, and actually almost 4 years of engagement with Pskov, the federal money was gone. We tried to find more federal money, but they weren't doing that. They didn't continue those kinds of programs. And we argued, how can you open lines of communication and have people build relationships and then tell them the money's gone, you're on your own?
Yeah.
I said, how are we supposed to support that? Well, they said that's not their problem. No, they didn't use those words, but that was their message. So we founded the Massachusetts Friends of Pskov, and we gathered together various individuals who had been making these trips back and forth and hosting. It was really a small handful of legislators, plus some friends in the lobbying world who were associated with us, in some cases former legislators. And we built up a collection of people, about 6 or 8, 10 people, and they started raising money in different ways, and then we would send delegations over. Since it was so expensive to bring delegations here, and it was much less expensive, we went there more often than bringing people here. But we realized that was not the best way to proceed. So for every maybe 3 trips over, we did one delegation here instead of one-to-ones.
Right. And Friends of Pskov was incorporated organization?
No,
Just an association of people.
an association, a loose association of very loose people.
Yeah.
And
And that would have been probably around 94, 95, somewhere.
early to mid 90s, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Early to mid 90s.
Yeah.
And then we would piece together money to do our delegations. Sorry, that was an interruption of a phone call. When I get a phone call, that will happen, and I'll just decline. So we had a very successful time of raising money, and we'd raise 30 to 50,000 at a time, and that wasn't chicken feed.
No, not at all.
And then we partnered with an organization that sent used but usable medical equipment, and that represented our first major project outside of the grant relationship that had developed as a result of the federal intervention or initiation. So what we did was, as I said, we always talked about mutual benefit. And so we said, we had befriended some people and got pretty close to them, and they became the go-to people, and we would ask them from, at each visit, what are the challenges you're facing here these days? It would be very informal. It wouldn't be, structured conversations. Although they always set us up meetings with the mayor and with the governor and with this and with that, because they thought we were more important than we really were. Uh-huh. They thought when I was there during my first visit teaching the course, I was Senator Rosenberg, so they thought I was a U.S. Senator.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And they rolled out the red carpet, so to speak. But they also were consistently asking me, where's the $40 billion? The $40 billion the U.S. government had promised. So they figured if I'm the senator, I should be able to get the money.
Right. Whoa.
So it was, but that, they eventually learned that we were the little politicians, not the big politicians.
Not the big politicians. Where did that number 40 billion come from? Do you know?
I just pulled that out of the air because I didn't remember the number.
Yeah, but it was a big number.
It was a big number, and they said, where is it? When is it coming?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, we're talking to people in Pskov, but we were talking to governors, the governor of Pskov, and so therefore the governor of Pskov would of course have relationship with the president and with the federal Duma and everything, and so this exchange. So we knew we were being asked on behalf of not the governor, because the governor doesn't get the 40 billion or whatever it is. It's going to be the federal government. Okay, so we would ask, what are you working on? What are you thinking about? What are the challenges that Russian society is facing? Never judgmentally, and then we didn't get into, well, this is how we do it.
Right.
We didn't try to lecture them and say this is the way, but we would engage with them in a way that there was a discussion and a dialogue. And then we could eventually say, well, do you think it would help if we worked together on blank blank? Uh-huh. And so the first major, do you think it would help if we worked on blank blank, was improving medical technology and access to medical technology. And they did it on behalf of the, quote, poor people's hospital.
Uh-huh.
So there was the rich people's hospital, and then there was the poor people's hospital. And so we were talking to the Boston Medical Center as opposed to Mass General.
Okay.
And so, do you think you could help us find? And we said, well, let's see. And we eventually connected
The
up.
people you were talking to are ordinary citizens. They're not the elected officials, but they're people that you met through your
Both.
travels.
Both.
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 Okay. Okay.
So I'll use a few names. So Romantsova. Why am I blanking? Tanya.
Yeah.
Tanya Romantsova was the government affairs person for the city of Pskov. And then at times she was the government affairs person for the province, for the oblast, for the oblast. And so we developed an extremely close relationship with her. She would often be the translator. She would be the host. We planned all of our visits with her as the go-between. And so she was part of the government, but she also would bring in people who were not part of the government.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd be sitting at Viktor Bibikov's table, and then at Alexei's table, and at Dontsev's table. And so we would slowly be building these relationships in civil society as well as in government.
Uh-huh.
And so we found a foundation that specializes in finding and shipping containers of used but usable medical equipment to second and third world situations.
Uh-huh.
And so we partnered with them, and over time we probably did over a 4-year period, 4, 5, 6-year period, we probably did 4 shipping containers full of equipment. And when the equipment, the first batch got there, which was quite challenging, but we raised all the money. The foundation found the equipment. They took care of the shipping. We paid the bill.
Okay.
We organized to make sure that when it got there, it would get into Pskov and that it would get into the right hands.
Right.
So it wasn't
the secondary market. Yeah.
It wouldn't be cleared of the best stuff. And we were very successful at being able to keep stuff within the rails. And when a couple of the doctors went in to see the shipment of material, they went crazy. They were like, wow, because they were used to getting piles of junk. Used mattresses and whatever.
Yeah.
And so when they saw the quality of what was in the shipment, they got very excited and started making lists, because they were figuring, if you guys can bring us this without our telling you what we needed,
right,
imagine if we told you.
Right.
So, as I said, we probably did 4 shipments over the course of 6 or so years.
Do you remember roughly what it would cost for those a shipment?
I think we were spending probably $30,000.
Yeah.
All in.
Yeah.
You know, getting it there. I'm sorry, finding it, shipping it, getting it unloaded, getting it through customs, because there were fees and stuff like that on the other end.
Right.
So I'm going to say $30,000.
Yeah.
$30,000.
Yeah.
And so then they started making lists, and the doctor who took the greatest interest was an immunologist. And he found these in perfectly good, workable condition machines that you need in an infectious disease lab, which they did not have at the Poor People's Hospital. So he put together a list and gave it to us. And when we learned what he was all about, we agreed that we would bring an immunologist in our next delegation.
Ah, okay.
And so that's one of the ways in which our group grew over time. And that's one example.
Okay.
The same thing happened with cranberry production, tourism development. So we found things that were of interest and made sense to them
Yeah.
for various reasons that were consistent with their needs. So we were never telling them, you should do this.
Right.
We were always listening, and they were saying things like, we're trying to get the airport reorganized and expanded so we could bring planes in. Well, why did you want to bring planes in? Well, we want to build a tourism industry. Oh, why do you want to build a tourism industry? Well, we were the first city in Russia. Pskov was where Russia began. Mm-hmm. We have all of this history. We have all of this. Oh, interesting. So we said, isn't that exciting? So Pskov was the first landing point in Russia. Yes. You understand us. It's so exciting. Well, of course we understand you because we have Plymouth, Massachusetts, which is where the Pilgrims landed. Uh-huh. So we were the birthplace of America. Look, another thing we have in common.
Yeah.
And this is how it went. It rolled like this for 25 years.
Wow.
About 25 years.
Wow. That is amazing. Yeah.
So I gave you a couple of examples.
Right.
I gave you a deeper example on the medical, and then I touched on a series of other examples of how we did this and how it kept expanding and expanding and expanding. Right. Well, let me go back to the medical. So we were able to get him the material for his lab, and we brought the immunologist over. That led to a deepening relationship, and they came up with projects and ideas that related to what they were doing. And so it built.
Yeah.
So shortly after the immunology lab got set up, there was discussion about STDs, because of course immunology takes you to infectious disease, which takes you to societal problem of sexually transmitted diseases, which of course in Russia nobody talks about because it doesn't exist.
Right.
And AIDS didn't exist, except the doctors knew it did. And so they said, what can we do together around AIDS and sexually transmitted diseases? So we built a program and brought it to Rotary International, and we got funded $300,000 over a 3-year period to build out a series of programs and projects relating to helping young people. Give me a second to bring back the phrase.
Right.
So to help them make appropriate personal decisions.
Okay.
And that led to the creation of curriculum. It led to the creation of a youth center that we funded, and then eventually the city picked it up. And it was a place for young people to come, to gather, and to be in a youth center, to have constructive time with activities that would be appropriate for young people, taking up more of their time.
Right. Yeah.
So they weren't getting into trouble. They weren't getting into drugs, weren't getting into sexual contact that was going to be problematic for them. Right. So
So
that
quick question. Was there a Rotary Club there in Pskov?
not at the time, and I don't think there is. Oh, they formed a Rotary Club.
Yeah.
Part of the project.
Part of the
They
project.
formed a Rotary Club, and Viktor Bibikov, who is the oligarch in the region, was the guy who took charge of helping to organize a Rotary Club. I don't know if it's still going.
Right.
I don't know the situation.
Yeah.
But they organized a fledgling Rotary Club as part of the project.
Okay. Got it. And
So that's the pattern that we went through. We would identify something with the help of our friends, and our group of friends kept growing and growing and growing in Pskov. And we would keep adding people here with the specialties that were relevant to the work that they wanted to do there.
Uh-huh.
And so the relationships became extremely deep and close. I mean, there was a list of families that the delegation or portions of the delegation visited at their dacha or their home or both every single visit.
Yeah.
They exchanged gifts, they exchanged holiday greetings and birthday greetings, the good times, the sad times.
Yeah.
It was amazing what got built. And so
How many people were involved in your group?
We never calculated how many people we took over.
Yeah.
But on one trip, we had about 15 in our delegation, and concurrent with that, we organized a tourism visit, which was a tour, not part of our government thing.
Right.
They were tourists.
Okay.
And there were 30 of those people. So at one time, on one visit, there were about 50 people from Massachusetts walking the streets of Pskov.
Wow.
And there were a couple of other times where we organized a hunting group of Americans who went hunting in Russia. And boy, do I have stories from that. And so
I can imagine there was no alcohol involved in those stories, was there?
Absolutely none. And there weren't trees either with loaded guns. People sitting in trees with loaded guns in the middle of the night, waiting for the bears. They came back with such stories. They partied until the wee hours, and then they said, "Well, it's time to go hunting." They took them into the woods. They got them up on the branches of big branches of big trees.
Right.
They said, "You sit here and you wait. The bears will come."
And you have to get them before they get you.
Well, these were very experienced American hunters. They crapped their pants. They were so scared. They were like, they'd been toasting for hours,
right?
Toasting and eating and stories. They did banya. I mean, they did the whole thing, and then like 1 o'clock in the morning, they go up into the trees, and they're like, "What the hell is this? Dan, what did you get us into?" And by the way, I was not there. I was comfortably in my bed.
Oh, but they tie themselves to the tree?
I have no idea, but they still tell the stories, but now with affection as well as boisterous laughter, because it's a once in a lifetime experience, you know.
Yeah.
And how many Americans have ever gone hunting with locals in Russia? You know,
Right.
so
Right. Yeah.
so they have that's their big fish story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so that's
So
kind of
you
it.
would say
Now,
probably hundreds of people
oh, hundreds.
participated in some form or other in your
Oh,
activity.
hundreds of people went back and forth, contributed, did consultation calls, and I mean all kinds. I mean hundreds and hundreds of people, and there was this core group of about 15 of us,
Okay.
and any given time there would be a dozen to 8 to 12 on a trip over. And
Uh-huh.
it just varied what the agenda was, who was available, how much money could I raise, because I was the nominal head of the group,
Uh-huh.
and I drove a lot of the fundraising. Terry Murray, who you've met,
Right.
helped a lot with the fundraising. Henri Rosenberg helped with the fundraising. Jay Curley over at Blue Cross Blue Shield. We touched so many different places. And I'm going to say we probably raised $1.5 to $2 million
Really? Wow.
over a 20-year period. Yeah.
So when you went to raise money, what was your pitch? Other than they know
Oh,
you.
we didn't have to pay. Exactly. That was it. The
Oh, okay.
senator called, so if we called a foundation that was in Massachusetts, like Blue Cross Foundation, I think contributed once. The Blue Cross of Massachusetts company contributed every year, $10,000 or
Uh-huh.
$15,000 a year. And that was based on the senators are making another pilgrimage. They're bringing this doctor, that doctor. We ought to support them. Jay Curley, who was their vice president for government affairs at that time, was a former Senate staffer, and he started going on the trips.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So, and then of course, when you get a $300,000 3-year grant out of Rotary Foundation, I think I'm remembering that accurately. I could be exaggerating, but I think I'm remembering that.
I think I remember you telling me about it. I don't remember the exact number, but
it was something like 300,000.
right.
Yeah.
And so people's commitment was to you and the work you were doing, and they knew there were tangible results on the other side, I assume.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
And then it became part of their portfolio because a lot of them ended up coming over
yeah.
and participating. Some of them were on calls. They got reports from us about what was happening, as you just said.
Yeah.
So it was very concrete. But eventually, they became invested as well.
Uh-huh.
The better they knew us, the more invested they became.
Right. And this project had at its base to build bridges between Massachusetts people and people in Pskov, correct?
Totally.
Yeah. And while you were doing that, I guess what I'm trying to ask, I'm trying to figure out how to get at what I want to ask, which is you felt you were building a better world, if you will, through this.
Tikkun Olam.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And
so it was a personal commitment.
Yeah.
It grew out of helping a friend at UMass.
Right.
Which helped me because I got paid, I think, $7,000 for teaching the course. Maybe it was $3,000. I don't remember. But
Right.
I got a stipend, and I got to go to Russia for the first time.
Right.
All expenses paid. But at that point, of course, coming to Russia, all expenses paid. What did that mean? Staying in a $5 a night hotel room with brown water.
Yep.
On a board for a bed.
Yep.
Yeah. And you didn't have a choice of food. I got 3 squares a day.
Right.
You walk into you walk into the restaurant area of the hotel, and whatever they put in front of you is what you ate.
Yeah. Okay.
Felt like I was at home.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, I lost 5 pounds and I never ate better
Okay. Really?
because I walked to work every day at the university at the Polytechnic, and it was a 1.5 mile walk from the hotel, and it was February. No, it was November, so it was cold.
Right.
It was cold, and so yeah, I experienced my first. That was my very first trip, and I was experiencing the beginning of winter.
Yeah. And did you at any point say to yourself, "Why did I do this?" Or were you also the opposite, saying, "Wow, this is just
No, it was the opposite.
yeah,
It's yeah,
yeah,
but see, it's in my nature to roll from one thing to the other once something starts. I don't give up on something.
yeah,
When I see an opportunity, the first opportunity was to do something I'd never done before: teach a course, go to Russia, experience 3 weeks in Russia, and I was a legislator, and at that time our salaries were quite low, so it gave
yeah,
me some supplemental income. And
right,
then they came back to me and said, "Would you continue?" I didn't hesitate for a second. I said, "Absolutely."
yeah,
And by the way, that first trip there was so hard, and I remember the the weekend before the final week of our stay there, the other teacher and I were in a van going to Pachori to see the caves as a tourism thing, and we were quiet in the van, and we turned to each other at one point, and we could both tell what the other was thinking, and we were on the verge of tears because we were so tired of the gray.
uh-huh,
Everything was gray.
yeah,
The buildings were gray, the rooms were gray, the food was gray, the people were gray, the sky was gray, everything was gray. And it was cold. And we hardly ever saw, I shouldn't say we hardly ever saw anyone smile.
huh,
Everyone, we were still strangers to them, number
right,
one. And number two, I was a government official, so people were afraid of me
uh-huh,
because the word, of course, got around. He's a senator.
yeah,
He lives large in America,
yeah,
and because they got it wrong, didn't live large in America. I lived large in Massachusetts, but even then, that would be a somewhat of an exaggeration.
yeah,
But so, but I did not hesitate for a second when I got the opportunity to continue, because once I got home and reflected on the visit and the experience, I said, geez, this is so important, and a real opportunity to be helpful.
yeah,
And incidentally, I'll tell you this other piece. Starting about my fifth, sixth, seventh visit, I gently asked our contact, Tatiana Romantseva, is there a Jewish community in Pskov?
uh-huh,
And she's a very deeply religious woman, very, very, she goes to church all the time, very motivated by Russian Orthodox church values. And so she was kind of looked a little bit awkward at the moment when I asked it, but I guess it, in a way, probably didn't surprise her. And she said, no, there is no identified Jewish community here. And I asked the question a few more times over the subsequent years, any change in the status. And then one year I occasionally went over by myself when things were getting a little rocky in terms of planning the next exchange. So sometimes I would fly over myself and spend a week in Pskov to try to move things along. And at this particular time, I had to make a decision whether to do it or not. And the only time I could do it was during Passover week.
Uh-huh.
And I guess I just decided I got to do this. So I'm just going to do it, because we were very deep into the relationship by then. I mean, we were 12, 15 years in.
Wow. Yeah.
I think I'm being accurate with my rough estimate here, because the wall came down in 91, didn't it? 92?
Well, the wall came down in 89, but the Soviet Union dissolved December 25th, 1991.
Okay,
Right.
so that was it. So my first trip was probably sometime in 92 or
Right.
early 93.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you do the math, it was over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you in a minute where the relationship went,
Right.
because it's different today than it was. So, but to finish up the story, because it's a really good story, is so I showed up and for this visit in April, and I come down the elevator to the lobby of the hotel to get my ride, and I'm early, as I usually try to be, and I'm standing in the lobby, and I'm positioned in a way that I can see the elevator, and I heard the elevator door open, and I just happened to glance over, and out walked two guys with black suits, black hats, white shirts, and payers.
I see it.
Yes, and I thought to myself, what are they doing here?
Right.
And they walked into the lobby, and they were obviously waiting for their ride. And so I'm looking at them, and they see me looking at them, and then they're looking at me. And so finally I walk over and I said, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And the guy said, "Everybody in Brooklyn speaks English." I said, "Okay. What are you doing here in Pskov?" And he said, "We're here from Yeshiva University, and we are going to be leading a Seder here at the Jewish Community Center." And I said, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah." And then I said, "Thank you." And I walked away, and they chatted a little bit. And then they walked over to me and they said, "Well, you seem to be interested in this. So we have some chicken soup cooking in the room. We have extra matzah. We have extra wine. If you'd like, we'd be happy to share it with you." And I said, "That's very nice of you, but I'd rather go to the Seder." And I said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, so let's see what we can arrange." And I told this to Tanya Romantsova, when she arrived. And she said, "Oh, yes, we have a Jewish community center now." I said, "Really? Tell me about this." And she said, "Well, about 6 months ago, the mayor got a call from somebody in town," and she mentioned the woman's name, "who told the mayor that they had been funded by an international Jewish organization to open a Jewish community center in Pskov. And they had purchased an apartment in one of the apartment buildings at the basement, the first floor, and they were going to officially open the center. Would he come to the official opening? And so, of course, he consulted with Tanya, who was his foreign affairs person,
Right.
and community affairs person, and she said, "Of course you should do this." And so she said, the mayor, officially opened the center with them about 3 months ago.
Wow. Wow.
And I said, "Well," I then told her my story, and I said, "I'd really like to go to the Seder." And she said, "When is it?" And I said, "Tonight." And she said, "Oh, well, we have a dinner plan with a group of people, but I think I can arrange this if you can stop by and do a toast with them at the official dinner, and then we'll give you a ride over to the center, the Jewish Community Center." So we agreed, we did it, and I went to the first Seder in Pskov since 1917.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
What an experience.
Wow.
It just was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And to the story as it unfolded that night, I won't bore you with all the details now, but it went on for a couple of hours, and there were people in their 80s, and toward the middle of the Seder, before the meal, but toward the middle of the Seder, the knock on the door, which brought silence to the room. This had happened repeatedly through the evening. Every time somebody had new arriving, there was a knock on the door and everybody went quiet. And somebody went to the door, looked through the hole,
Yeah.
and let the people in.
Wow.
The last group to come in were two kids, one high school age and one college age.
Wow.
And it was like, this is it. L'dor v'dor, from generation to generation.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
It was so moving.
And these people who they considered themselves Jewish, although they hadn't practiced their religion.
They knew they had Jewish roots.
Yeah. Okay.
And they identified about 140 individuals in the community.
Right.
And those individuals, many of them, started to frequent the Jewish Community Center.
Right.
And I raised money for that too. And I arranged for money to bring a rabbi once a month to Pskov for Jewish education and religious ceremonies. And that lasted 5 years.
Where was this rabbi from?
St. Petersburg.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And it was an Orthodox rabbi, and there was some trepidation about it being Orthodox, but it is what it is.
Right.
So,
well, there's no reform anywhere in the world except the U.S. So,
yeah, right.
I mean, yeah.
And then I raised money. I didn't pay. I raised money for 4 years in a row for them to do a Shabbos weekend at a camp. So they would leave the city and they would go into the country and they would spend Friday night through Sunday morning and do Shabbos in the camp.
Right.
And arrange to have a rabbi be with them for that.
Wow. It's amazing. I mean, in theory, they should have been pretty easy to identify people as Jewish because their passport would have indicated that they were Jewish. I mean, in theory.
Who looks at their passports? I mean,
yeah.
When I asked the question, I was asking a government official,
right,
a general question: is there an organized Jewish community? And the answer was no, there wasn't.
Wasn't. Right.
And eventually there was.
Yeah.
And then the next trip I made over, she took me to, she put something on the agenda that I didn't recognize. And it turned out that she took me to a place where there was a stone erected in memory of a pogrom that occurred in Pskov.
Wow.
Of the Jewish community.
Huh.
And we did Kaddish. I asked if she minded. And
wow. Those kind of experiences, and I remember my own first experiences going there. They just hit so deep emotionally,
Yeah.
They do. Yeah.
And she was fantastic because we were like brother and sister. I mean, we got so close. And, all of her trials and tribulations there, she eventually started confiding in me, and we went to her mother's home, and her mother made pelmeni for us every year.
Yeah.
On our visit, she couldn't wait to see Terry, Stan, and Mark.
Yeah.
So it was just that kind of, and so when I raised the religious thing, it was very important to her because she was deeply religious,
Right. Right.
and so it meant a lot.
Yeah. That you had, even though you didn't have the same spirituality, you had a spiritual side to your life that you could share and reveal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
you talked that after your first trip, you didn't, you said nobody smiled and you didn't. When did people start inviting you into their home in such a way that you felt like those barriers began to break down?
In the second grant, which was the 3-year
Yeah.
USAID grant, we started being invited to people's homes. And when we went into people's homes, we saw three things. One was how simply and compactly the average person lived.
Right.
The second was the food that we figured their whole month's food was on the table when we walked in.
Yeah. 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 It was the hospitality and the sense
Yeah.
of that hospitality was so important to them as well that they were going to be willing to give you whatever they had, Yeah. 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 And so that's all part of the relationship that you built.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So because we were in their homes, they started to relax a little more and, tell us about their family and show us pictures and because, we were mostly political people at the beginning.
Right.
We were academic and political people at the beginning, but there were always political people in the group, no matter where we went.
Yeah.
Some of us were with the academics. So we were the icebreakers and, so if you had a stodgy professor who himself rarely smiled, it didn't matter because the politicians took care of creating, the environment from our side
Yeah.
of friendliness and courtesy and excitement and appreciation of being in their homes. And so the relationships started to build right away.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so by the second or third time, the grant went on for 3 years. So maybe the second or the third time, they've now invited their kids, they've invited their grandkids, and you started to get a real sense of familiarity.
Yeah. Yeah.
With each other. Yeah, it was so.
And it's these relationships more than any grand ideals of U.S.-Russia friendship that really drive this. Am I
Totally.
right? Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And they would say things like, governments don't tell the truth. We're smart enough to know that America wasn't this basket case that was being presented to us. Right. And we said, we know that, Russian people are just like us.
Yeah.
They have families, they have jobs, they want to get their kids educated. So we're all the same. So governments are governments, people are people.
So when Clinton bombed Belgrade, did that impact on your relationships? Did people want to know from you, why did this happen? It wasn't part of your discourse.
No, event. We would exchange. So basically, if you think about it this way, we were there 1 week a year.
Right.
If there was a second trip, it was usually me for 1 week. So for 50 weeks, none of us were with them.
Uh-huh.
So therefore, the bad things that happened on both sides, there was a very small chance that we were actually present with each other when it
was going on.
So there were exchanges of emails, and usually very carefully written on either side or both sides, depending upon the situation. So you remember when the submarine a bunch of Russian sailors died in the submarine accident. And so whenever things like that happened, we would exchange heartfelt expressions of condolence and sympathy and unity with them in spirit. And they would do the same with us. So anytime there was something really significant that was painful on either side, the other side would respond by reaching out, always reaching out first, and then the other side expressing appreciation for reaching out and for caring enough.
Yeah. And so outside of the people you were close with, was there suspicion? Were the security services wanting to know, well, what are these people really doing? I mean,
well, we knew we were being followed at various times. We knew, let's say the first 6 years, 10 visits, whatever. Everything was in the guardrails. Everything was scheduled. We didn't veer off. The bar that people went to in the evening was in the hotel. And we knew we could tell the people who were sitting in the lobby who were FSB or whatever.
Right.
I mean, we didn't know. We knew we felt and understood their presence.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
So, and as the years went on, the oligarch, Victor, started playing a role around that, where he would have his boys aware of where we were going and what we were doing, and things loosened up. So members of our delegation would go to a club on their own, without a translator, without anybody official, but there was always somebody there, even though they didn't know it.
Right.
But it wasn't the government people. There may have been government people, but Victor also had people.
I see.
And there were times, and we know this because there were times when somebody in our group got themselves into a difficult situation because they had had too much to drink. They don't know enough of the social norms. They don't know the language.
Right.
And, we had one member of our delegation who one time was black, and he was spit on walking down the street. So things like that, Victor took care of. So when Henri got in trouble at one, I shouldn't use the name. So when one of our delegation got in a bit of a problem, there were 2 or 3 other members of the delegation with him, but somebody came over and in Russian spoke to the guys who were creating the situation on the Russian side, and it ended.
I see. So Victor was, to use the Russian word, he was your Krisha, right? You know the word Krisha, right?
No, he was.
Krisha means roof, but he was, everybody has, at that period, had to have Krisha, meaning friendship or oversight by somebody important.
Right.
And so
he was our guy. By the way, can you see what time it is? Because I have a 2 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 1:36, and you have until 2. Okay, so I will.
Okay. So Victor was that to us, and he was like he called us brother and sister. Terry was his sister. Stan and Mark were his brothers, and I stayed at his home. Everybody else was at the hotel. He invited me into his home for probably the last 7 to 10 visits.
Yeah.
I stayed in his house instead of at the hotel.
Right.
So there were those kinds of things that occurred. So we became part of the fabric of this community of people who were also connected with each other there, and we became part of the fabric of that
Right.
community.
And how did Victor make his money?
Well, when the wall came down and they started dividing up the roles and the assets, he was on the business side for the first number of years. He then ran for governor unsuccessfully, so he never actually went into the government. But he got the paper factory, he got a ton of forests, he got the fishing boats, he got the canneries, he got the telecommunications.
Wow. Okay.
So he was the oligarch for the region in charge of all of those pieces.
Right.
And he built business from there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So which of these projects that you did over this period of time, and then because of that, I want to ask you this question, and then I want to get to the second half, how it wound down.
Okay.
Which of these projects are you most proud of?
Well, it's not the projects; it's the
relationship.
Whole thing.
Yeah.
The relationship, the depth of the relationship, the sincerity of the relationship and connections that got developed.
Okay.
It's exactly what countries and people should be doing.
Okay.
And so through citizen diplomacy, right on the street level, we were developing these kinds of relationships, and people learned about us and what we would do. We were in the press probably for the last 15 years of the relationship. We were in the press every visit.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Announcing projects, announcing grants,
Right.
announcing relationships, and they organized all of that. We didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
So we would be interviewed by TV, we would do press conferences, and they just loved having their American friends there.
Right. So
And people would recognize us on the streets. We
wow.
could see
because they'd seen you in the TV or right.
And after 5 or 7 years of that, they were, even if they didn't see us this time, some people might recognize us because he's back again.
He's back again. Yeah, yeah. Well, most people didn't go back again, and most,
Exactly.
yeah. So, what's the backside of that, and what remains of this relationship?
Okay, so this is the careful part, of course.
Yeah.
So Putin, having been reelected, coming back into government, he started to shut down the mechanisms that encouraged exchange, citizen diplomacy, and the growth of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And since there weren't a lot of NGOs, but we connected with a lot of the existing NGOs or developing NGOs in Pskov. But there weren't many, but we connected with a lot of them,
Yeah.
maybe most of them.
Yeah.
And then there was some new laws passed that related to basically that were discriminatory against gay individuals, and there were at least 2 in our delegation regularly who were gay.
Yeah.
So the decision was made that if we can't all go,
right,
we're not going to go, because that would be discriminating within the group against members of the group. So we stopped traveling back and forth. So I got there 24 times. My 25th time, I was battling cancer and had to cancel, but the group did go. And that ended up being the last visit. And that was about 7 years ago, I'm going to guess.
2014.
So let me put it, wait a minute, let me do it this way. Terry Murray was still Senate President. I became Senate President in 2016. So I think the last trip was in 2015.
2015.
Because I never got to go as Senate President.
Yeah.
Which they
And
were really
did
looking
you know
forward.
it was the last trip? Did they know it was the last trip?
No, because I think the laws got passed after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the relationship continues in the following way. For most of the last 5 years, I still had money available in an account. And when I had a courier, remember I would call you and say, "You're going to Russia?"
Yeah.
So when I had a courier, I'd send 5 or 10 at a time. And somebody from Pskov would go to St. Petersburg for coffee to say hello to my friend.
Yeah.
And that supported the continuation of programs for another 4 or 5 years. There's still money in the account. I've not been able to connect with the woman who was running the foundation, and I fear that she may have passed, but I don't know.
Okay.
In which case, there's about $30,000 that was still available. But I stopped getting calls from people at UMass saying, "We're going over. Do you need me to bring anything?"
Right.
And so I just reached out to her about 2 months ago and didn't connect.
Okay, so this is a Russian woman or American woman?
No. This is an American woman, Nora Gannon, from American Medical Resources or something like that. It's a foundation she started.
Okay.
She was from Plymouth, the same city where Terry lives.
Right.
And Terry didn't know her before this. It was a coincidence. And but because Terry lived in Plymouth and this was involving her, Nora got very excited, and she worked with us for 15 years or more.
Right.
So there is still some money sitting there, but I haven't been able to find Nora, nor have I found anyone to give money to bring over. But if I can find her and know there's money, I'll work harder to find somebody to get it there. But it also turns out that Tanya Rumantseva has been battling cancer for the last almost 6 months now, and we're in almost weekly touch, I would say, every 7 to 14 days.
Yeah.
And she's in good spirits, but she's still fighting.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much longer. That said, there is another friend there who's also Tatiana Samoilova, and she would pick up where Rumantseva left off if that were necessary. But I haven't found Nora, so I'm not trying to raise expectations because I don't have money to give, and I don't have a position from which to raise money anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Right. I think it might have been Kovalenko he's kind of there's a person from Pskov who's a fitness nut, who's a Facebook friend of mine. And he was just in Pskov with his family. So these UMass connection of these people who came would be,
right.
If you decide you want to try to follow up, they would be people to talk to.
Sergei and Sergei's wife is Natasha. Sergei and Natasha go over there at least once every year or two.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. That would be the logical way to handle this. But so that's going to redouble my interest in trying to figure out where the money is.
Yeah. And
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And the other woman I talked to, Sasha Proshina. I don't know if you remember her.
I remember her. I didn't know her well, but I've met her.
Yeah, I haven't talked to these people, in several years. I mean, there were lots of reasons to it one time, and there haven't been.
Right.
Yeah. So, So if I can be of help to you in doing that, if you decide it, just let me know, and maybe we'll
Thanks.
just brainstorm about it.
That was so logical. Just thinking about Sergei. Why didn't I think about that? I mean, I know how to reach him, and I know he goes every year or two. He and Natasha bought a beautiful apartment, and they were fitting it out, and her parents were going to live there until Sergei and Natasha moved back to Pskov, which I assume they'll probably retire there. I don't think they're going to give up their careers here, but
do you think that Terry Murray would be willing to talk to me about all this stuff, or interested in talking to me?
I think she probably would, because she just absolutely loved that whole chapter and really got into it.
Yeah.
So I think if you wanted to do that, just between you and me, she and I haven't spoken for a few years, because she was part of, not hands-on, but she was part of bringing me down. So
yeah, that's very unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that.
And she helped me get there.
Right.
But she had a bunch of friends who were unhappy that I got there. And then when things went sideways with, when they saw the opportunity to take me out, they joined in it to make sure it happened. So, and I'll never say that to her. And someday I may talk with her, but in politics, a lot goes unsaid. And so I don't want to be part of connecting you, but I think yes, but we should think about how you could. Well, wait a second.